Hey yo, JG the PT, back with another video for the JGang. If you haven't already become a member, I suggest you hit the subscribe button along with the notification button. Follow me on Instagram and Snapchat at JG_the PT. Got a Facebook page too, follow me there at JG the PT. Or don't, stay a bitch, that's cool, that's on you. Now today's video is going to be all about when you should be training your muscles aerobically and when you should be training them anaerobically. I got this message sent in from my boy Mitchell, that's my done. If you know, you know. Let's get into the video. Now before we get started, we need to clarify what is aerobic and what is anaerobic. Now essentially aerobic is talking about contractions taking place with the use of oxygen, and anaerobic is talking about contractions taking place without the use of oxygen. Now it's specifically referring to when the exercise is taking place and the muscular contractions are taking place, the energy source that is being used to fuel those contractions, the primary energy source being used to fuel those contractions, when that energy source is broken down, is it being metabolized with oxygen or without oxygen? So aerobic is with oxygen, anaerobic is without oxygen. Now before I answer the question and I talk about when you would train aerobically versus anaerobically, what we need to clarify is why you would train aerobically or anaerobically. Now there are so many goddamn benefits to training aerobically versus anaerobically, I've had to write them down on a list for myself to read. Now, if we talk about aerobic exercise, that you would train aerobically if you were trying to improve your muscular endurance, if you were trying to develop the slow twitch fibers, if you wanted to improve your aerobic endurance and your cardiovascular system. Now when you train using aerobic exercise, cardiac hypertrophy takes place. Now cardiac hypertrophy will still take place using anaerobic exercise, but the difference is how it takes place, because cardiac hypertrophy, if you don't know what it is, the type of muscle used to form the heart is a specialized type of muscle called cardiac muscle. It's a muscle that is only used for the heart. You won't find cardiac muscle anywhere else in the body. The muscles that you see, motherfucking muscle mass, that is skeletal muscle. You can see that. You also have smooth muscle, which is the sort of muscle that's used on like the organs and the insides of the digestive tract and the stomach. That's all smooth muscle. The linings of the organs, that's all smooth muscle. Whereas when referring to the heart, it's specifically cardiac muscle. When you train aerobically or anaerobically, the cardiac muscle will hypertrophy. It will get bigger, the heart will literally get bigger in size, but the way that happens when you train aerobically is during the aerobic training, the left ventricle is subjected to an increased preload. Now, what this causes is it causes the left ventricle, which is the chamber that the blood is pumped out of in the heart, it causes the left ventricle chamber size and thickness to increase, so it can better handle this increased preload. With aerobic exercise, you'll also get increased fat mobilization and increased fat oxidation during the exercise. So when you do aerobic exercise, the primary fuel source is fat. However, this doesn't mean you're going to burn more fat throughout the rest of the day, because during the exercise, yes, you'll burn more fat than you would if you were doing anaerobic cardio, or anaerobic exercise for that matter. However, when you perform aerobic cardio and your body utilizes more fat for fuel during the exercise throughout the rest of the day to compensate for that, you will burn more carbohydrates than you usually would throughout the rest of the day. You can also use aerobic exercise to increase your VO2 max. It will increase your lactate threshold. It will increase your body's ability to buffer lactic acid. It will also increase the levels of hemoglobin and myoglobin in the blood. It will increase the number of capillaries in the body by up to 15%. More than what you currently had. It will also increase the number, size and efficiency of the mitochondria in the muscles. Boom, that was a big old list. Now if we talk about anaerobic, why you would train anaerobically, you would choose anaerobic exercise if you wanted to improve your recovery time. That's a big one. Now this anaerobic cardio is better for improving recovery time, because when you do anaerobic cardio or anaerobic exercise, you have these short bursts of really intense exercise, it jacks your heart rate up, but then during the rest period, your heart rate comes down. But then you're jacking it back up again, and it comes back down, then you jack it back up, and then it comes back down. And the way your heart will adapt to this, and the way your cardiovascular system will adapt to this, is by decreasing the amount of time necessary for your heart rate to come back down, and that will increase your recovery time of your heart rate. You can also use anaerobic cardio to increase your VO2 max, just like you can with aerobic cardio, or aerobic exercise, I should say. Anaerobic cardio will specifically develop the fast twitch fibers more than the slow twitch fibers. So if you're looking for advantages in terms of power, strength, hypertrophy, you want to be developing the fast twitch fibers. So if you had someone performing resistance training, trying to grow muscle mass or trying to get stronger, and they were also performing later on in the day, or on another day, they were performing anaerobic cardio or sprint training or something like that, they would be optimizing the development of their fast twitch fibers, which would later on help that person with their goals of hypertrophy or with strength or with power. It saves time. Anaerobic cardio, because of the nature of it, you wouldn't train anaerobically for an hour. You might train anaerobically for 20 minutes, and that saves a lot of time, because when you train aerobically, that's usually about 30 to 60 minutes or longer, depending on the specificity of your sport and the requirements of what you do. So it saves time. Now, another thing that anaerobic exercise can do is it's not definite, but it can increase your strength, because strength is the body's ability to generate force. Now in physics, the equation for force is force equals mass times acceleration. Now, if you have a sprinter doing a 100-meter sprint, and you test the time it takes for him to sprint that 100 meters on week 1, and then you have that person perform anaerobic exercise, specifically sprint training, for 8 weeks, at the end of those 8 weeks, if you were then to get him to sprint 100 meters again, and you timed it, he would be running it faster. Now, the reason I say it can increase your strength potentially is because if we remember that force equals mass times acceleration, the sprinter's body weight, his mass, has stayed the same. However, if he's managing to sprint the same distance in a quicker time, he is increasing his acceleration. His acceleration has increased. Now, if you take the formula of mass times acceleration and you have a bigger number for the acceleration, you get a bigger sum of the equation. Therefore, the force went up. And if strength is your body's ability to generate force, he got stronger. Now, like I said with aerobic cardio, it'll increase your fat mobilization, oxidation throughout the day. With anaerobic cardio, you get the opposite. It will increase your carbohydrate mobilization and oxidation during the exercise, but throughout the rest of the day, to compensate for that, your body will burn, it will mobilize and oxidate more fat throughout the rest of the day to compensate for the high amount of carbohydrates that were mobilized and oxidated during the training. This is why some people use high intensity interval training when they're trying to lose fat, because it gets their body to utilize fat throughout the rest of the day, and obviously the rest of the day is longer than their actual training period, training session, I should say. Also, you can use anaerobic exercise to improve the recruitment of fast twitch muscle fibers and to improve the efficiency in which the motor units are fired. And just like aerobic cardio, you can use it to improve your cardiovascular system and to cause cardiac hypertrophy. Jesus Christ, that was a big old list. I don't expect you to remember all of them, but those are the things that come into play when you're deciding why you would train one over the other. Now, that's all well and good, but what if you need or want both your aerobic abilities and your anaerobic abilities to improve? Because as you can see, aerobic is more moderate intensity, focused on slow twitch fiber development, whereas anaerobic is the opposite of it. It's more powerful, it's more explosive in its nature, and it focuses on fast twitch development. But what if you want both? Well, that is when the when comes into play. Now, you would never train both in the same session. If you were trying to focus on the development of your anaerobic abilities, you wouldn't train aerobic abilities in the same session, because what you do when you train is you send signals to your body. However, when you're sending mixed signals, your body will go, well, which fucking one do you want? And instead of adapting optimally to your aerobic or your anaerobic, it'll just adapt a little to both, and that is not what you want out of your training. You want your training to be efficient. The only time you would train both your aerobic and anaerobic abilities in the same session is if you were performing a sport. For instance, Mitchell, the person who asked me this question, he practices Muay Thai. Now, when you're sparring, you're doing something that's both aerobic and anaerobic. Because when you go in and you're throwing those flurries and you're throwing the elbows and the kicks, that is very anaerobic. It's a quick action and it requires a lot of force to be generated quickly. However, if a round goes on for 3 minutes, or I'm not sure how long a Muay Thai round goes on for. In boxing, it's about 3 minutes, so that's what I'm going to base it on. But if a round goes on for, even if it's just longer than 90 seconds, which I guarantee you a round will be, if it's longer than 90 seconds, then the aerobic energy systems come into play. So now you're performing cardio that is aerobic, but you're also doing anaerobic. You're performing anaerobic movements whilst you're doing something that's aerobic. So both come into play. That's the only time you would train both, because you're not really trying to train them, you're just trying to get better at sparring or whatever sport you're doing. Now ideally, if you were going to focus on aerobic or anaerobic, you would ideally train them on separate days. However, if you were going to train them on the same day, you would do aerobic or anaerobic in the morning, and then later on in the evening, you would then perform the other. Now, we've talked about why you would train aerobically or train anaerobically, and we've also talked about when you would train. All that's left is how. Now, the how is simple. You exercise. But what kind of exercise? Now, this is where you have a little bit of free rein. You can kind of play around with how you do it, because any kind of exercise can be aerobic or anaerobic based on two things: the duration and the intensity. Now, what I mean by this is the duration of the exercise itself, or the sets you perform for the exercise, and the intensity at which you perform the exercise. Now, let's say you wanted to do something, you wanted to do some sort of exercise that would increase your aerobic abilities. Now, for something to be aerobic, you have to perform exercise that utilizes the aerobic energy system. Now, all you have to do to bring the aerobic energy system into play is to perform exercise that goes on for longer than 60 to 90 seconds. That's all you have to do. If you were to jog for a minute, then congratulations, you're bringing the aerobic energy system into play. Now, if you were going to go for a jog, you wouldn't just jog for a minute. You would jog. Who the fuck is calling me? Fuck off! Puss! I'm fucking filming, I'm working. I don't need that shit. What the fuck was I saying? Right, now, if you were going to jog, obviously you would jog for longer than a minute. A minute isn't a very efficient amount of time to train your aerobic abilities. Aerobic exercise is something that's going to take longer than 90 seconds to perform in terms of the actual exercise itself, and you're going to perform it at anything that's less than 60% intensity, or 40 to 70% of your heart rate reserve. But that's a whole nother fucking video. So if you want me to talk about how to find out your heart rate reserve, leave a comment down below and I will get on that. But yeah, that is the essential of how you, that is the basics of how you would go about designing something that focuses on your aerobic abilities. Now, in terms of what exercise you perform, that's all about specificity, the law of specificity. And where you would, when we talk about specificity, we talk about performing exercises that are specific to your sport or your goals. Now, for the person who asked this question, Mitchell, for instance, if you were trying to improve your muscular endurance in terms of kicking, you might perform kicks on a bag for 3 minutes straight. You wouldn't do it super powerful every single time, but you would just do it for 3 minutes straight. I mean, you could do it super powerful if you wanted to, but you would do it for like 3, maybe 5 minutes straight of just kicks on a bag. And that would, in fact, if you did do 5 minutes straight, or 3 to 5 minutes straight of kicks on a bag, each kick as powerful as you can, but so long as you weren't, taking breaks in between each kick, you would just kick, reset, then kick again, you would actually be developing not only your aerobic endurance, but also your aerobic power. However, if you wanted to develop your muscular endurance in terms of the muscles used for punches, you wouldn't throw kicks. You would make it specific, you would throw punches. So that's what I mean by specificity. To perform exercise that's anaerobic, you would do any kind of exercise that's going to utilize the ATP-PC or the adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system, or anything that uses the lactic acid energy system. Now, again, it's about duration of exercise and the intensity at which you perform the exercise. So when it comes to duration, anything between 1 to 90 seconds long. You go longer than 90 seconds and congratulations, you're now training the aerobic energy system, which isn't what you're trying to do. You're trying to train the aerobic energy systems, and you're trying to train your muscles in an aerobic manner. So anything that is between 1 to 90 seconds. So you could perform very powerful kicks for 40 seconds straight. Boom, power each time, every single kick, power in each kick, and you would develop your anaerobic power because the duration is shorter. Now, the general rule of thumb when it comes to intensity for anaerobic exercise is anything that's about 60 to 95% intensity, or 80 to 90% of your heart rate reserve. And what I mean by 80 to 90% of a heart rate reserve is based on a calculation you would use to find out your heart rate reserve. It gives you a number, and then whatever is 80 to 90% of that, whatever that number is, that is where you want to get your heart rate when you are performing that kind of exercise. And again, it would be about specificity. So specific to your sport would be elbows. So you could get a bag down on the ground and just elbow that bag for 40, 50 seconds straight as powerfully as you can every single time, and it would get tiring, but over time, every time you come back to train it, you do that same anaerobic workout, you would get better at it. You would find it easier to endure and sustain that kind of powerful exercise for that short amount of time. So yeah, that's about it. I hope this helped. I hope this answered your question. If anyone has any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Like the video, share the video, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already, become a member of the JGang, you know what it is. And yeah, follow me on Snapchat and Instagram at JG_the PT. Follow me on Facebook at JG the PT. Peace!